The majority of each kidney is made up of nephrons. So nephrons are considered the structural unit of the kidney, but also the functional unit because they're not just they don't just make up the structure of the kidney, but it's actually where the filtering of blood takes place. And as I mentioned, they're microscopic, so you can't see them with the naked eye, and there's more than 1 million in each kidney. Now, a nephron is made up of two main components. So one of them is called the renal tubule. And on this picture here, the renal tubule includes the kind of yellow tubular structure that you can see here. All right, you see it's got like loops and it kind of twists around. And the renal tubule is made up of four kind of distinct or different regions. The first region here is called the glomerular capsule, or also called the renal capsule. And this is where blood is originally filtered. So you'll notice that the glomerulus is here, and the glomerulus is the capillary bed where blood filtration takes place. So material gets pushed from the blood into the renal tubule at the glomerular capsule. From there, the fluid gets transported through the proximal convoluted tubule and then through the loop of Henle and then the distal convoluted tubule. And then multiple nephrons, you can see that there are attachment points here for multiple nephrons. Multiple nephrons converge and deliver the fluid, the material, into something called a collecting duct. And ultimately, these collecting ducts keep converging, and ultimately the urine is delivered to the ureter so that it can go to the urinary bladder. So the renal tubule itself is the glomerular capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and then collecting ducts are connected to multiple nephrons. There are also blood vessels associated with the nephron, and these are the ones I pointed out in a previous video. So there are afferent arterioles delivering blood into the capillary bed called the glomerulus. And then from there, the blood drains out through an efferent arteriole. Think of the E as standing for exit. But then that blood, the efferent arteriole branches into another capillary bed. And this capillary bed here are composed of the peritubular capillaries and the vasa recta. So these two, we're going to just kind of lump them together and talk about them as one capillary bed. All right, so basically you've got blood delivered to the renal tubule here, and then you've got more capillaries here. And that's because we're going to be exchanging fluid and other substances like sodium between the blood and the renal tubule. So we pass stuff back and forth. So the renal corpuscle is this area here. And as I mentioned, this is where filtration of the blood plasma takes place. And we'll take a look at that function on some later slides. And then the peritubular capillaries and vasa recta are surrounding the rest of the renal tubule. So first of all, let's take a look at some different terms with regards to different fluids associated with the process of forming urine. So first of all, the fluid starts out in the plasma, which is the liquid portion of the blood. So fluid, along with other materials, get pushed from the plasma of the blood into the renal tubule, and that happens at that glomerular capsule. Once that fluid enters the renal tubule, it's no longer called plasma, and it's now known as filtrate. And plasma and filtrate do have different materials dissolved in them, so there is a difference in their makeup, their chemical makeup. So filtrate is the fluid in the renal tubule, and then urine is the fluid that is ultimately excreted from the body when you pee. So filtrate gets modified as it moves through the renal tubule and is not known as urine until the modifications are done and it gets transported to the urinary bladder so that it can be removed from the body. So in the next video, we're going to talk about these 3 basic steps of forming urine. So first of all, we have filtration that takes place. During filtration, plasma, remember this is the liquid portion of the blood, plus some solutes, which includes things like sodium, potassium, and glucose, gets transported from the blood in the glomerulus into the renal capsule. And this is how we produce filtrate. So the filtrate is just the fluid that came from the plasma and the solutes that were able to cross through the thin walls of the glomerular capillaries. The next step that happens is reabsorption. So filtration is a non-selective process, meaning that anything small enough to squeeze across the walls of the glomerulus and squeeze across the walls of the renal tubule are going to get pushed into the filtrate. But it's not selective, meaning that bad stuff gets filtered, but good stuff also gets filtered. So reabsorption is where kind of beneficial materials. So we reabsorb a lot of water and things like glucose, maybe some sodium and some potassium, and some nutrients and electrolytes that we want to keep in our body. And so during reabsorption, that material gets transported selectively. So the kidneys are able to transport only glucose or only sodium without transporting just the bulk fluid with all the stuff in it. So water and good stuff gets selectively transported from the filtrate in the renal tubule back into the bloodstream. And so this is stuff that if it's staying in the bloodstream, it means that we get to keep it and our cells get to use those materials to do things like make energy. And then the third step is secretion, because not all of the bad stuff gets filtered originally. So if there's additional kind of bad materials or waste products that are still in our bloodstream that need to be excreted in the urine, the renal tubule, the kidneys, are able to selectively transport those undesirable materials from the blood in the peritubular capillaries and vasa recta into the renal tubule. So as we talk about these steps in more detail in the next video, pay attention to where the material is moving. So is it moving from the blood into the filtrate or from the filtrate into the blood? Anything that is kept in the blood stays in the body. Anything that stays in the filtrate will eventually be peed out as urine.